Hi guys, and Happy New Year to you. What you see in the vise is Rick's Hover Dragon. Rick Passek's a Canadian fly tyer who we're going to be doing a little challenge with. So he sent me 3 of his favourite flies and I've done likewise. At the end of the video you'll see a short conversation that we have about each other's interpretation of the fly. But in the meantime, without further ado, let's get into it. Now what I'll do as we're tying the video, I'll put Rick's original tying up on the screen and then I will put my interpretations list of materials up. But let's get started. I'm using a Hackle H230 barbless hook. This one's at size 8, it's on a heavy wire and it's finished in black nickel. The thread I'm going to be starting with is Simplify's Nano Silk. It's a heavy thread at 200D. As you can see, it's white, and as always, just because it's a new year, old habits die hard. We're going to get a little bit of super glue onto the shank to make sure the thread adheres to it. It doesn't quite cut it wax with the nano silks and the black nickel, so I always like to get that bedded down. There is nothing worse than coming across a fly that rotates round the shank of the hook. So this will alleviate that problem, and I'll just take away the rat's tail. Well, I trust you all overindulged over the New Year period. I know I certainly did. Now the first thing, I'm going to stick pretty closely to the dressing that Rick has given me, and I've got some natural pheasant tail here. I'm going to take a good sort of half a dozen or so fibres. Make sure I've got a nice, I'm just going to use my thumb there to ease it so that the tail fibres are a little bit more even. Just get them into line a bit. Then I'm going to dress it up to the hook. I'll just take that outlier away. I'm going to dress it up to the hook and I want about the length of the shank for my tail. I'm going to catch that in with a turn. Try and keep the remainder of the tail on top of the shank, and we're going to come all the way back to approximately 1/8 of an inch from the eye of the hook. Then I can take away that excess. Now on the way back down I'm going to add my body material, and what I'm using is some Simplify's suede chenille. This one's golden olive. I believe Rick used a slightly different colour. It doesn't really specify in the dressing, but I'm going to use golden olive. Now I've clamped down on that fairly tightly as I come back towards the back of the fly, and I'm getting quite a lot of pressure onto it. Now as I get to the end I'm going to come back up, and the reason I chose to start with the heavier Simplify thread is I just want to build up the body. Now what Rick did, I believe, looking at the dressing, is he put some foam in the underbody to give it that little bit of bulk. I'm just going to use tying thread. I'm not a great believer in overcomplicating dressings where I don't have to, so I'm going to do it like this. Leave plenty of room at the front for all the action that's going to happen there. I'll take this chenille, I'm going to bring it round and start to build the body. Touch and turns with a chenille. I believe Rick has published several books that are very popular over in Canada, and he's an avid fly tyer who's doing quite a bit of travelling now. He's retired, I believe, so I'm sure that's a lot of fun. I might have just got enough to get this part of the fly done. I've been a little bit tight with the chenille, but it's not a big problem. Just makes it a little bit more fiddly for myself. And then I can come in, trap it in. Once I've got a couple of turns in to hold the chenille, I'll get a couple of turns in front, and then I can come in with my scissors and just take away the tiny bit of excess. I don't believe in waste. So there we go. I've got that in place. I'm going to bring my thread back up, tidy up that cut end, and then I can come in with my whip finish tool and just discard the nano silk at this stage. So what was the point of having the nano silk? Now it's probably quite difficult to see on camera, but I've got a really nice taper in the body here now, and that's why I wanted to use that heavier thread to build up that taper. Now there's a couple of things that I might have done with this fly, which I did think about, was putting a layer of lead foil down underneath to give it a little bit of weight, but in the end I opted for a more lightweight pattern. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in some champion thread. This is the, I can't see the code, I think it's A1 from Troutline, and I'm going to get plenty of wax onto my thread, and then I can cast that on right into the eye, and then once I'm content I've got that attached to the fly itself, I can come in and take away the rat's tail. The next thing then is I'm going to create some mono eyes. Now how I've done this is I'm going to be using some of this 30-pound Daiwa monofilament. I'm going to use my old scissors to cut approximately 1.5 centimeters off. We'll just get that out of the way. What I do next is, if you've got some needle nose tweezers, catch in your monofilament. Now I know it looks quite a lot, but I want to create quite a big eye. So I've grabbed that. I want them even. Just see that's a little uneven. And then I can just melt the ends. Now the monofilament might go on fire. It will go out when it hits the metal, but you can blow it, and then you can create your monofilament eye. Now it does take a little second for these to go solid. Don't immediately drop them in your hand, you will burn yourself, and it's quite painful. So give it a little second, just let them dry off, and then eventually you'll be able to drop them off in your hand, ready to go onto the fly. Now before I dress up the eyes to the fly, I'm going to just get a little bit more wax onto my thread. I'm going to bring it forward to about the middle of the gap, so the 1/8 of an inch gap I've left. I need room at the back here, so I'm going to catch it in there. Couple of turns. Now this is going to get a little bit awkward for you the viewer as I fiddle about trying to get these eyes in the centre. I know your view is obscured and I apologise for that, but we'll get there in the end. Now I'm just going to tilt the vise my way and make sure I've got the eyes bang on in the middle, and once I've got the thread wraps that are acquiring, I will show you what I've done. So you can see there, I've just made sure the eyes are nice and even. Now you can go over this in a crisscross motion as much as you deem necessary, but we will be putting some dubbing over the top of that. So I'm going to bring it back to where my chenille finished. The next thing then, we're going to add our legs, and again we're back to our pheasant tail. I'm going to come near the bottom this time and just take a few pheasant tail fibres, and I don't want them to extend any further than the length of the body. I'll just turn it, invert my vise, catch them in underneath, then I can lift the legs and remove my excess. Now the next thing then is we're going to add some olive CDC. Now the way I've done it is I've already used half the feather, as you can see here, and I want to, not being a wasteful person, I want to use the remainder for this next fly. Now I've got a clip here, and this is the Mark Pettyjohn clips. You do get other clips, and I've tried most of them, but I always tend to come back to these. I need to buy a new set actually. They're covered in gunk and goo, and I've had them for a long time, so I probably deserve another set. So I've caught that in, and what I'm going to do is with my scissors, and you do need really sharp scissors for this, just to get a nice straight line all the way up. Try not to waste any of your CDC. And I've left approximately 2mm for me to catch in. While I've been whittering on, I've had time for the thread to spin down and flatten out. So the thing to do is get your needle in behind the thread, just flatten it all out, and then you can come in with your dubbing needle and just split that thread. What we're going to do next is insert our clip with the CDC feathers, keeping quite a lot of tension on the thread, although with this bobbin it's quite heavy. I don't need to be overly worried about keeping the tension. Then I'll spin the thread back up. Now the temptation is, of course, when you're doing these sort of things, and with any fly tying to be honest, is you tend to, especially if you're beginning, if you're just new to the hobby, there's always a temptation to use much more materials than you actually need. So I'm keeping this CDC loop quite close to the chenille, and as I come back I'm starting to ease the fibres behind me. Just getting that out the way, like so. And that's looking not too bad. Next we're going to add in some English partridge. As you can see, I've selected a feather here, and I'm going to strip what I don't require just off camera there. So I've got this. Now normally I would tie in the English partridge feather using, I'd use my Hackle pliers to create the Christmas tree effect and tie it in at the point. Now on this occasion I'm going to tie it in at the stem, and I've just got a wee bit more fibres there than I'd like, so I'll pull them out the way, and then I can snip away the bulk of the stem. Before we tie that in, I'll get a little bit more beeswax on, and then I can capture that in with a few turns. Now this is the tricky bit, because the English partridge I'm using here is a few years old. It is very delicate, so I'm going to catch in with the tip, and then I'm going to come round the eye. I'm only looking for maybe one and a half turns maybe. So there's the half turn. Just opening that up as I go. There's one turn. Just try and ease another little bit in to capture that into place. Then just keeping my thread still behind the eye, I've come in and just securing the tip of that English partridge. Now I'm not worried about the feathers coming to the front at the moment, because I can fix that once I've secured the tip. I'm pulling everything back. That one's just been a little bit naughty, but it will conform to my will. And secure that into place. Now that's looking not too shabby. Next thing I'm going to do is come in with my toothbrush just to help separate out those fibres in the English partridge, like so. And then instead of, I believe that Rick used a hen's dub at the front here, I'm going to be using some of this. You can't see it, it's an SLF dub. It's called Prism Dub. Sadly, it's no longer available. This is from a store in Scotland called Country Life, which used to be just on the corner of Lothian Road, if I remember correctly. But sadly, like a lot of these shops, they seem to have gone. They're not able to survive with the internet competition. So I've dubbed on. It's quite thin, and I'm going to get several turns at the back. Then I'm going to crisscross my eyes a couple of times, and I'm going to bring the thread to the front of the fly. Now, before I quit finish, I'm going to add a little bit of UV resin to my thread. I don't want to be going in and clogging up the eye area with super glue or any other kind of finishing varnish, because this needs to be coming out. The dubbing that I've just put in there, sorry, I'm just trying to locate my UV torch. Now, as you can see, the eyes are quite dull, and I'm going to change that in a second by simply adding a tiny little layer of UV resin to the eyes. And what this will do is it will just make them shine a little, make them pop in the water. And already you can see there's a difference when I shine the UV torch on them. You can see the eyes got a little bit more sparkle to it. So don't forget to stay tuned and hear what Rick has to say about my interpretation of his hover dragonfly. So, as promised, I'm joined by Rick, who sent me 3 of his flies, and we're going to start with the first one. It was the hover dragon, and I tied my little version here I've got in front of me, and it was slightly different to Rick's, as he had an under foam body, and it was a fly that was designed to fish on a long leader over weed beds, and I kind of get that now, but I still believe if I was to gink up the hackles on this fly, I would achieve a very similar sort of effect. So how do you think I did, Rick? What do you think of the interpretation?
I actually quite like it. It's completely different than mine, but I think you nailed it on the head with that. Yours can be used for multi-species, like multi-insect. So you could be a mayfly, could be a damselfly, could be a dragonfly. Mine is more specific to a dragon. So I think yours is a little bit more fishable than mine, like in a variety. The only big difference, like you already mentioned, is the big point with mine is long leader with a fast sinking line, long leader, so it sits up here and hovers, and then when you give it those poles, it tugs down and then it floats back up, right? And that really attracts the fish. But I think yours, like I said, overall is a more fishable overall fly. So
I did. I obviously watched your video on the tying of it, and I considered putting lead on, but it wasn't. It didn't quite feel right, so I went without and just went with the normal chenille body. And I think, as we mentioned before we started the meeting, I also considered dumbbell eyes made from tungsten to get that motion effect, and it would be more for if I was fishing it on a floating line, I could generate quite a lot of movement with different styles of retrieve with the fly.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. If you're gonna try it in shallower, like 10 feet and under, and having dumbbell eyes and having that undulation going, and or even right down in the marl or the silt in the bottom when you're stripping it, getting that little puff of mud. That really would attract the fish. So I actually tie one I call my deep dragon, and I do exactly that. I have 3 layers of underbody flat lead and just get that thing down, right?
Yeah. So and I can imagine the movement's fantastic on it. But it was a really fun tie. I always quite like doing the mono eyes. I quite like making them, and as long as I don't burn my fingers, I quite like making them. But great fun to tie, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah, well, I hope you give her a try actually out in some of your lakes out there. That's kind of the other portion I want to do with it. I'm going to take the flies I tied from yours, and I'm actually going to try them in our lakes and our river systems here in British Columbia, Canada, and see. I mean, trout. They're gonna, right? So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but so that's the hover dragon. I got that out of the way, and your fly. What one are you going to do first, Rick, from the selection of 3 I sent you?
Well, I think we're going to start off with the little grub, but we'll do that in a separate recording. So we'll see you guys on the next one, I think, eh?
Yeah. See you next week, guys.